Hello, I'm Katie, and this is the Free Art and Design School podcast, web series, whatever. And I have yet another great guest today, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Yeah, I'm Andrew Stewart. I'm a artist designer that makes toys and monsters.
Living monsters.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um, do you identify more as an artist or as a designer, or are you at a weird sort of in between in your life?
It feels like I've been at an in between for a while. Definitely, being a designer puts food in my mouth, but being the artist is like what I care about most. So, leaning more towards that
Got
these days.
it. Nice. Do you want to talk a bit about the kind of projects you have going on?
Yeah. So right now I'm working on my next batch of sculptures have a sale with. I usually produce anywhere from like 12 to 30 pieces and then just drop them all at once and put them up for sale, as well as working on two commissions right now. So
Nice. Is
yeah.
it ceramics or resin or something
Oh,
else?
I am so sorry. Yeah. So I start off digitally sculpting my creatures and then doing 3D printing just to get them out physically, and then a lot of post processing and painting, and then eventually I mount them on wooden plaques with little brass nameplates under them.
Very cool. Do you name them or do you have people name them or like
I like to let people name them. I'm a terrible father. Because I have given names to some, but I forget them constantly. I try to come up with sort of like pseudo scientific names for them, but
that's cool.
also forget to do that sometimes.
So it's like your version of Pokemon, except you're the one inventing all the Pokemon.
Exactly. And instead of clever names, it's me sort of ham-fistedly shoving things through Google Translate into Latin and trying to find what sounds coolest.
Well, I feel like a lot of the Pokemon names are like that too, so I wouldn't be too hard on yourself. How did you start doing that? Because that's pretty niche.
Yeah, I made my first two in undergrad. I studied industrial design in undergrad, and I ended up loving the wood shop and falling in love with just fabricating things by hand. I was introduced to 3D printing then, but I hated it, and I like made fun of everyone who used a 3D printer for most of their projects. Um, but yeah, I learned how to work with wood, basic woodworking tools and some machinery. And once I learned about like, you know, a router and how I can make like fancy beveled edges, I was like,
Mhm.
oh, I can make wooden plaques. And I'm like, oh, what could I put on the wooden plaques? And I was like, oh, I could put monsters. So very obvious connection there.
Yeah.
Yeah. So and then I just started making monster heads. I made two and really liked these two little ones I made, but I never really got back into it until about like 2 years after graduation, being in San Francisco and in the workforce and everything, and just feeling a little creatively deprived. I jumped back into it and then haven't stopped since.
Only you could be creatively deprived while working at a design studio. Um, when I was in college, I took a sculpture class and I was deeply afraid of all the woodworking tools, like all the saws and things. Like, do you not have any sort of innate fear of power tools or anything?
I've been traumatized twice. Took a little bit of recouping and a couple of therapy sessions to sort of come to terms with mortality. But yeah, no, I saw two sort of gruesome accidents when I was an undergrad. Um, but I am surprisingly, as clumsy as I am, like I am safe around heavy machinery. And I've had one or two like sort of close calls with heavy machinery, but nothing serious other than some breaking of the skin. Hand tools usually way more dangerous for me. Like in my
Really?
yeah, so many scars and whatnot from like exacto blades and saws. I sawed into my finger last week.
No. Are you okay?
Yeah, oh yeah, it's fine. It healed up fine. Uh, but you just you get lazy and you want to work fast, and so you're like, oh, I don't need to clamp this down. I can just hold it, and then next thing you know, you have a pull saw going through your finger, and you're like, ah, okay.
Wow. I wish I could be as casual as you about bodily harm. But I think that's really cool. I I haven't interviewed a ton of people who do mostly like physical sculpture type stuff, mostly printmakers, painters, whatnot. What sort of made you interested in more three-dimensional art and design, or like why'd you choose your major in the first place, I guess is a better question.
Um, the reason why I chose my major is I went to RISD and they have a foundation year there. So your freshman year, you take a 3D design class, a 2D design class, and a drawing class. And during that, like that was my first introduction to fabricating things for the most part. I learned very basic woodworking in those classes, and it allowed me to really play around with just making things in 3 dimensions.
Mhm.
And I really fell in love with that process and just working with my hands. There's something very therapeutic about it. And I found it much easier for me to like sort of get into that, like, I guess, flow state, really just hyper fixate on what I'm working on. Had a lot more fun doing that. And there's something very satisfying about having something you made take like dimensional space. As,
Mhm.
like seeing your work in general is a surreal, weird, cool experience.
Yeah.
But yeah, having something that's like occupying a good amount of a room is sort of funny in a lot of ways. I think that says a lot about me, probably.
What's been one of your favorite, or any of your favorite experiences that doing this project has, I don't know, created for you?
I got to go to Bonnaroo Music Festival down in Tennessee. They reached out. They wanted 10 heads of mine to decorate one of their like tertiary venues. They have
Mhm.
like the main 2 stages and they have like some secondary stages, and then they have their tertiary stages out actually in like the campgrounds.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, one of the tertiary stages is called the Galactic Giddy Up, and they're like, oh yeah, taxidermy alien seems like a good fit. That was super cool. Very wild experience. Like one being reached out to them because that I grew up like an hour south of it.
Oh wow.
I knew all about this music festival and just seeing how they displayed the work as well. In my mind, I for some reason thought it was a much smaller space than it actually was. Turned out to be pretty huge, and the heads were a little dispersed. There were a few groupings, but the I think there's like 2 heads that were off on their lonesome, and they just look so sad.
Oh, that's like, did you not get to survey the space before you started? I guess you wouldn't have, right? Like you wouldn't have had the time to like see stuff. Oh,
They sent me a mood board.
they sent you a mood board?
They were great to work with. I don't want to seem like I'm slandering them at all. I absolutely loved everyone I talked to through that process. I absolutely loved working on the project, and getting to see them in person was incredible. Yeah,
Actually, maybe that leads into a good question, which is like you've been in the workforce for a little while. Do you get the sense that things are getting weirder as like more of our generation and younger people are like in creative control of certain things? Because I feel like the world is a lot weirder than I expected it was going to be 5, 10 years ago.
absolutely. I don't know how much like our generation is to credit. I think it's also like boomers and Gen X like being like, we have to appeal to the kids, we have to get
Yeah.
weird. But it's so funny because like you can tell when they consult
Hmm.
actual young people. Because sometimes it just lands so flat and you're like, oh, this is trying so hard. And then it becomes that whole conversation of like cringe. It's
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
uh
It's really interesting too, because like I it feels sort of like we're in a very surreal era where like everything on social media is just kind of like you said, it's either a company that's trying to like pick up on contemporary trends, but then they're tweeting like it's the company, but it's really like a social media manager and like $1 million marketing team, which feels disingenuous and a little terrifying. Um, but I also like literally can't imagine the future. And I don't know whether that's because I'm like afraid of the apocalypse or whether it's just genuinely like there's nothing after postmodernism. But maybe that's a good thing for artists, right? To be able to like find your niche and like make work like you do. Do you have sort of, I don't know, what's your current philosophy on being an artist in the 21st century? Maybe that's too big of a question.
no, I think it's
Do you
fine.
get through the day?
I mean, it's just like there's so much, there's so many more responsibilities, I feel, if you want to be an artist in you know, 2023, especially like a younger one, because, you know, you need a platform and you have to be cognizant of like, what platforms am I like on? Like, what is my presence on those platforms? How do I present myself? I need to create things. And it's so funny because, like, you know, I'm on TikTok and posting my process on that. That becomes sometimes as much work as actually making a sculpture, and like documenting it has always been important, but now it's like 10 times more important, because your end product isn't always the product. It's
Right.
usually, it's just like the process is the product, because that's what you're putting out there. That's what's going to get eyes on your work and hopefully lead to like people desiring your work.
Wow, that's horrific. I hate that. Like, I don't know. I appreciate people documenting their work because that's actually useful for other people to learn. Although in some ways that just means other people, if they put in the effort, can just copy you, which, you know, I mean, power to them if they can go through all the 20 hours of work it takes to make an individual thing. But I don't know, like when I was working at the print shop, it seemed so important to me to document things and put it on social media because it's like this is a dying art, or this is like these machines are 100 years old. I want to preserve history. I want people to know about these things. But then when that becomes your like full-time job, you don't have time to like make the art, and that seems sort of depressing and against the purpose of doing the thing in the first place.
Yeah, yeah, it can be a bit of a bummer. And like I'm not like I'm pretty terrible at it because, you know, I'll just be like, oh, I'm excited to start painting, and I won't set up like a
Yeah.
tripod thing, or I'll forget to wipe the lens of my camera and all the footage is greasy and unusable. But
Although greasy is, you know, that's kind of the point, right? It's being you're not artificially polished. Do you have sort of um advice on keeping the burnout and the like capitalistic dread at bay when you're making work or when you're planning things?
um it's hard. I feel like I am not coming out of a period of burnout. But like I had intentional rest. Like I had the luxury of, after I finished a really big push and created like this pretty large body of new work, um, it was super hard, but like I tried to give myself some leeway, and relaxing and just like not doing anything. Which, you know, it's just like you have capitalism yelling at you that you need to like be doing something all the time, and like your own imposter syndrome and the guilt, beating you up. And it was super hard, but it was necessary, because yeah, it's just like it, it's so easy as just like a human in general, not necessarily like an artist, just to continually ram your head against the wall. And it's just unsustainable. Like you need to take a rest and heal before you go back to ramming your head against the wall.
I hate that advice. I'm always ramming my head against the wall. That's what I do for fun. No. But it's true. I was talking in one of these other interviews about how kind of the contemporary world forces artists to like monetize every fucking thing they do, even if it's just a hobby, even if someone's into like knitting or watercolor, like everyone has an Etsy shop. And it seems like that's sort of against the purpose of art making in a way. Like art making is for your soul and your spirit. Oh, it seems like you have sort of struck a balance with that. I don't know, maybe not.
No, it's so funny because, you know, I have old coworkers and I have people in my family and friends who are just like, quit your job. You could probably just make these heads full time. And I'm like, maybe, but I don't know if I want to. Because
Yeah,
right now, like I have that leisure. Like I am incredibly fortunate to be gainfully employed, be making enough money to live comfortably, and like have free time to do my own art practice. And that's been, I think, why I've not burnt out on my own personal art. I've burnt out creatively through my design work and my 9 to 5 job many times in the 6, 7 years I've been in the workforce. Um, but with my own personal art, because it doesn't have that pressure of like, I need to be monetizing this, uh, to live.
yeah,
It allows me to have a much more, I guess, romanticized relationship with my own art, which has been hugely, hugely beneficial because I'm not putting any more pressure than I already am when it comes to trying to make art for myself. Like, I want something to be good. I want to do something new. I want to challenge myself. And it's so nice that I don't have the added pressure of like, I have to sell this at the end of it.
Right. Yeah. We were just talking about this, how you're a perfectionist about your own work, which is funny because, like, in some ways you get, and actually every way you get to set the standards of what success is to you, which is nice because no one else is like, oh, you have to make the thing this way or profitable, or this company is like, why didn't you do it XYZ way? Um, I don't know. I'm trying to think of how to phrase some of these questions I have because you've created such a unique style and brand for yourself, which is really cool. And also, like, I guess I don't know a ton about the sculpture world. I wish I knew more about it, but like, um, sort of the last wave of academic sculpture that I learned about was like stuff from the 70s that was pretty funky and surrealist. Do you have like particular inspirations for like why your work looks the way that it does? Because I can't think of any analogs, which is a compliment, not an insult.
No, because it's not inspired by the art world at all. It was so funny when I first started posting my stuff on Instagram. All the artists I followed were like illustrators, and like bootleg toy makers.
Hmm,
So a
got
lot
it.
of people who make custom bootleg toys, doing like really wild resin casting. A lot of artists that do custom painted like sofubi Japanese vinyl toys. Because one of the things that got me into art when I was 12, 13 was learning about like designer toys, and that being like the weird intersection of like graffiti and like toys and sculpture. I was just so stoked on that, and that like very much painted my interest from there on out. Or at least like my interest aesthetically being like super bright, colorful, poppy. Um, so yeah, I get a lot of inspiration from like toys, which is funny because I work in toys and that's what I do. But yeah, a lot of that inspiration comes from old retro toys. So it feels so funny calling my monster heads like art, because there
Right.
is this idea of like, oh, you're making sculptures in 2023. It must be some weird like abstract assemblage of found objects that has a higher like meaning towards whatever. But no, it's just like I wanted to fucking make some weird droopy old looking bird monster thing, like
But it is fine art. Like, it's perceived as fine art, which I think is super interesting. And maybe that's like the pop era sort of like changed what's allowed to be, in a museum. Do you see like, would you like to see your stuff in a museum? Or is it like, like you were saying that it's strange perceiving your art anywhere. But like, I don't know. What's your relationship with your children like?
um imagining them in like the sterile environment of a museum seems really unsettling. Like it'd be cool, but like I imagine like a coffee shop gallery or something like that, because it's just like I was saying, there was no reason behind me making sort of these monster heads other than like the impulse of like, I want to see this out in the world, I want to make this thing. But the more I like analyze my own work, aka I had to write an artist statement.
Yeah.
um and I had to like pull things out of my butt and see what sounded good enough, or like what I wasn't like ashamed of putting out there, and
Yeah.
like it didn't make me sound like such a tool. But yeah, it's just like it's sort of a reflection of my childhood interest and my upbringing. Growing up in the South, hunting is a huge pastime. I had so many friends who had just a ton of taxidermy in their house, and I was always like so morbidly interested in it. Like there's something just so like gross and comedic about the human tendency, like our need to kill something and then mount it.
Yeah.
I feel like that is just so grotesque in so many ways, like, and it's a very European type deal, because it's just like other cultures in the past have like used every part of like the
Right.
animals that they kill, and usually like killing is to eat and sustain yourself, not necessarily hunting for sport. And that's all gross, and like the ties to colonialism in there, like just this mindset of like, oh, I'm going to go somewhere different and kill the beast there and tame
Yeah.
it and bring it home and display it. Like it's so fucked. And it's so funny because like a lot of the things that like people were hunting to near extinction in like Africa, like there are carnivores, but a lot of them are herbivores.
Yeah.
Like
Well,
unless you really fuck with them, they won't mess with you.
you're going to be in trouble when the aliens that we've just discovered invade and then see all of your Bonnaroo work. Um,
Exactly.
this is so interesting. So I've found one of my interests is the question of taking yourself seriously. And you might be the perfect person to ask this question of like you do so much work and you have such a like clear it seems like you have a clear vision of the work you want to create and why you make it. But you're also very joyful and very passionate. And I'm wondering like how you strike the balance of like taking yourself too seriously or not taking yourself seriously at all.
Um, I think once again, that's the super fortunate situation I'm in where it's just like my art practice is almost exclusively for myself. Like, yes, I do sell my art and yeah, I do take commissions and everything, but like I don't feel that obligation to do that. So like I'm able to be super sort of laissez-faire when it comes to just like my own attitude towards my art. Like I can really pour myself into like one piece and try to make like a very serious looking monster. But at the end of the day, it's just like I take a step back and I look at what I'm doing. And don't get me wrong, I love making these things, but it's just like this isn't serious. This
Yeah.
isn't like this is bringing happiness to people, and I love that. But this work isn't important. Like that, I am not making serious work, but I'm serious about the work.
Okay.
Uh, yeah.
That's a good way to think about it. Although I'd argue either all artwork is serious or no artwork is or important or not important. Because if you are bringing joy to people, which you clearly are, then you've sort of done your job. Um, yeah, I don't know. Do you ever, I mean, I know your job is in toys, but do you ever wish that your personal practice was making things that people could more physically interact with? Or are you happy just making a beautiful thing and being like, look at this thing, don't touch it, don't fuck it up?
Um, I would love to make, I guess it's less actually physically interacting with it, but like my dream is to make a big mouth Billy Bass, like the fake taxidermy that sung
Oh my God.
or be happy. Like I want to make that. like if, like I don't necessarily want to like mass produce it because then you have to deal with all that. And I also don't want to feel emotionally responsible for, creating 100,000 animatronic things that just sit in a warehouse and
Yeah. Yeah, I have a personal sort of disgust with production, which I think is actually bad for me. I think I need to learn how to be more unethical. Or be okay being unethical. Because I genuinely like when I was making t-shirts for my thesis, I was like, these are gonna end up in a landfill. And like it's disgusting to me that so many design jobs are just making things that are not even bringing joy to people, just like being part of the greater capitalistic machine. Um, but yeah, I think I don't know. That's so interesting to me. Do you want to talk about the other work you've done with kinetic sculpture?
uh,
Um,
yeah. So I am also part or was a part. The artist collective is in a state of flux right now. The pandemic really like sent everyone on their own ways, but part of a art collective called Fold House that I was connected to through my 9 to 5 job at IDEO. Really incredible individuals there, like such a great collection of world-class engineers and designers. And I was fortunate enough to be like a small part of it. So they make large scale kinetic sort of origami sculptures. So I started off making these flowers, absolutely beautiful. So Jurg, who was one of the founding members of it, he did like his thesis in grad school, sort of emergency shelters that are like super quick to deploy and the route he sort of went down for sort of fabricating them would be origami. So he started making large scale origami with chloroplast, which is essentially plastic cardboard, incredibly durable material and cheap. Uh, so he got super fascinated in that. I might be ruining his story. Apologies if I am. But anyways, he wanted to make large scale art. He went to Burning Man and was very inspired by that. He felt like he wanted to, if he were to come back, he wanted to make something and bring it. So he made these flowers. So they were like huge PVC pipes that they bent, and they had like these origami leaves, and then the actual origami head of the flower that would open and close, and it had lights in it. And it was gorgeous, and people really loved it. And then 2 years later, they make giant mushrooms that are all origami, and they like expand and contract, and they're just mesmerizing. And then 2 years after that is when I got involved, and we spent an entire year making the largest sculpture that we've done. It was called Radiolumia. It was like 30 feet tall, or maybe more than that. I can't remember. Anyways, it was a giant geodesic sphere with like these long spikes on them, and a ton of those origami umbrellas that would travel up and down the spikes and expand and contract. And like one of my best friends got to create a custom like program that controlled all the LEDs, and I forget how many LEDs it had, but it was a ludicrous amount, and they're all individually programmable, and it was just so cool. That was a year of my life just like fully invested in that, and don't regret a thing.
Oh my God, that's so cool. It's amazing you've been parts of different things and gotten to experience sort of a variety of different art projects that are all physical and interesting. What's like when you hear about something that you really want to do, or you think about something you want to do, like what really initially draws you? What are like words or images that you're like, oh, this is something I need to do. This is something that like inspires me.
If there's like a lot of excitement behind like the person presenting it, like that was one reason why I was so drawn towards like Fold House in particular, is because the people who were involved with it were so passionate about it.
Mm-hmm.
And there's something like very intoxicating about being with people who are super stoked to be doing what they're doing. Um, and like honestly, like that was my favorite part of undergrad. That was my favorite part of art school, was just being around people constantly stoked to be doing something and doing the thing that they want to be doing. Um, and that's like a high I've been chasing ever since.
Yeah.
Uh, and so like, yeah, and Fold House was like a great sort of taste of that, a little reminder. So it's just like that enthusiasm so infectious, and it really is like a piece of fate. And I have found myself foolishly like over investing myself in things because I might join a cult one day, who knows. Like people have been just super stoked on this project that they're working on, and that just makes me want to help. Because like if there's something I can do to help someone else realize their dream, like I want to help
Yeah.
the ways that I can.
That seems sort of like the designer's curse. You're not the first person I've interviewed to say that. Like just being a part of a team and giving any sort of assistance possible to help all these different projects is like, I don't know, it's a very fulfilling way to live a life. Not that I've been a designer very long. And who knows how much longer I'll be doing this. Or alive. No, I'm kidding. But I don't know. It's really exciting just getting to people like you especially, who like have figured out their own project and like how to do it and commit to it and make it feel like real and established. Um, if you could talk to yourself from 10 years ago, what would you say about life or advice on being an artist and designer?
Yeah. Uh, I mean, the dumb advice would be like, learn, like, take sculpting seriously.
Mm,
I didn't take any like traditional sculpting courses in college. I took classes in the sculpture department.
yeah,
They didn't teach you any techniques or anything like that. Uh, yeah, I wish I'd known that. So technically, I would be a little bit further along now. But that's terrible. Like a terrible answer to that
It's
question.
not though. I mean, someone else I talked to was like, "Oh, I wish I had just like enjoyed the space I was in when I was younger, and now I think about that every day and enjoy the spaces that I'm currently in." And I was like, "That's wonderful advice, you know?"
Yeah.
I don't
Uh,
know. Other than more sculpture and taking it seriously, which is something you can do at any point. Um, Anything more profound or not?
no, if it doesn't excite you, don't waste time on it. That was something
Mhm.
that took me a while. Like, I don't think it was until like maybe my junior or senior year where I was just like, if I don't care about a project or an assignment, like I'm not going to kill myself out over it. Like I'm going to do it and I'm going to do as best of a job as I can, but I'm going to do as much without overinvesting myself, being overly ambitious because like everything you get out of it what you put in.
Mhm.
And like if you do not care about the thing you're putting effort into, like why over expand like extend yourself and destroy your mind and body over something that ultimately it's like cool, great, now what? Yeah, and that was a huge turning point in my own sort of experience within art school was just like identifying the projects I care about and really going all out with those projects, and the projects I didn't care as much about, like just sort of go through the motions, knock it out. Yeah.
Wow, I wish I'd interviewed you 3 years ago. That would have made my life easier. I did not learn that at any point. Um, Damn. Yeah, I think I don't know, maybe this is morbid, but I keep thinking about how short life is and how like design and art projects take so much time and how you only have a finite amount of these things that you can do, not to bring the mood down. But it really sort of like shifted my perspective away from like career worries and more into like if I only have a few hours a day to work on something that I find really fulfilling, like I need to do it, which is pretty hard when you're feeling blocked or stressed or like, unemployed. But I'm wondering how you get through. I know you said that you haven't been an artist block because you just had this wonderful experience that you've been able to rest through. But do you have sort of any other advice on how to stay creatively stable? And like you've made so much work, and clearly it's like not easy work. It's a lot of like challenging technical things that you're doing. How do you sort of maintain that energy throughout your production run?
I try to do some reflecting. I mean, also, I have absolutely had artist block. I just don't feel the full effects of it because I don't try to force myself to make things all the time. Or at least I don't have that pressure to feel like I need to.
Yeah.
But I mean, sort of reflecting on my past work, like it is healthy, I feel like, to go through your old stuff and see how you've grown.
Mm.
Uh, Even in like the past couple months, like you learn a new technique and then you start applying it to your next project and then it becomes like a staple in your process. um I always find that like really helpful. So yeah, it's just like it's easy to get down on yourself, it's easy to be hypercritical, but it's nice to take that step back and like look at where you started. Like I have in my room or my little like studio office space. Like I have a sculpture I made when I was probably like 13, and it's so bad, but I love it so much. It was like, oh yeah, like that's where I started.
So when you're being hypercritical on your next run, you're gonna take your own advice, or do you never take your own advice? Are you preaching to a?
I'm pretty bad at taking my own advice, but I try to.
Well, then you're a good person to interview because anyone watching this won't be you. So in the last couple minutes, I'm wondering if you have maybe more general life advice to artists or designers starting out who don't necessarily have like the resources that you and I have had access to, which is sort of the point of this whole thing that I'm doing, is that it's free and accessible and like different viewpoints and perspectives.
uh yeah, you don't need school at all. That seems topical for this whole thing. There's so many resources online and so many things out there that like school is a great platform. It is great for certain people, but it's not perfect for everyone. And also, like, you don't necessarily need it to gather the skills you need to be a creative individual or employed in a creative field. Um, there's so much you can learn. I mean, through the internet, it's too much information, but also, like, if there's something hyper specific, like there are apprenticeships, whatever. Yeah, you can apprentice underneath someone or go that route. It's much better than going into debt.
I learned more in my 2 months apprenticing at the print shop than I did in 3 years of grad school. So there's my life lesson.
Yeah.
That's actually maybe interesting because like you've done all of your it's called Grundle Heads.
Yeah.
Yes. No, yes. Like you've done that not in school. Like you are no longer in an academic institution. So you've sort of had to, I assume, learn most things not in a classroom or from scratch.
Yeah, it's funny. I've had people ask me, and they're like, "What do you study in school to do this kind of work?" And it's just like, I don't know. You tell me. Like, because like studying industrial design, like that taught me certain skills and certain like tools that I use absolutely. But so much of my own creative practice like is sort of self-taught,
Mhm.
going through like YouTube tutorials on how to like use an airbrush in painting techniques and to software tutorials and sort of knowledge I've garnered from my own 9 to 5 job.
Mhm.
So yeah, it doesn't, sometimes it doesn't matter what you study.
Okay. I'll
Yeah,
I'll take that. Um, maybe sometimes it matters what you study and feel free to like pivot and explore other things that you're interested in. Maybe that's the sweet spot combination of school and not school.
absolutely.
Um, well, we're down to the wire, so thank you for joining us or joining me. This has been really nice talking to you, and I really admire all the work that you've done. So it's cool to hear your perspectives on things.